Welcome to the last part of chapter on marketing environment, on the marketing environment. Just kind of finished up with cause-related marketing a little bit. Subsection of social marketing, where I try to get you to do good things. Stop smoking, stop drinking are the typical ones that we throw into that. The next section is culture. So we ask ourselves, what is culture? Culture is the values, it's the belief system that society wants. So there's a couple things that we know about culture. One, culture is learned. We don't come out of the womb with a culture. Number two, culture is put out there by society, and society supports it. Number three, we think that our culture is the best, the one we grew up with. It's just the way it is. We do things a certain way, not just because it makes sense, but because it's the right way to do those sorts of things. So I have a question for you. I want you to think about the question and the answer we'll talk about. You're traveling across the Atlantic in a ship. The ship hits an iceberg and starts to go down. There are a limited number of lifeboats on the ship. You have to choose either to put your kids on the lifeboat or to put your parents. Which do you choose? In this scenario, you can't put both. It's either your kids or your parents. Now, in the United States, and if you're from the United States, there's a 99% probability that you said you would put your kids on the lifeboat. If you're from one of the Asian countries, Southeast Asia, Saudi Arabia, places like that, there's probably 80% probability that you said your parents. Used to be higher, but the Western influence has really reached out and talked to those parts of the world. And here's the thing. If you're from the United States and you hear that, you think, well, there's no way that they're going to put their parents on the lifeboat. In the United States, we like youth, we like beauty, we like health. Old people have none of that. In the United States, we're kind of afraid of our old people. We put them away. We put them in a home. We don't want to hang out with them. Now, on the other hand, if you're from Saudi Arabia, you would look at your American friends and you would say, you are the worst child I'd ever heard of. Are you trying to tell me you would not put your parents on that boat? You owe your parents everything. It is amazing to me that you would not take care of them. And that's how culture works. We feel that our own culture is what makes it go, what makes it drive. So, like I said, it's based on those institutions that are out there. One of the big institutions that teaches us culture is family. It's the first one. So we're going to look at the Chinese family here. We have two sets of grandparents. I just pulled these off of a Google picture search. We have one set of parents there, and we all aimed at one child. This 4-2-1 scenario has created in China the little emperor syndrome. So in China, this person here is the focus and hopes and dreams of 3 generations. So you in the United States, if you're from the United States, if you don't do well, then your parents have a brother that they can pin their hopes on. So it's not all that. Your friends from China are under a tremendous amount of pressure to succeed because there's nobody else. And they've also been the center of attention of all of that in their lives. So things like kids' toys, nice designer kids' clothes, they sell well in China just because of this little emperor syndrome. Other things we have are religion, we have government institutions, we have education, and a huge one is media. As media has become to get a little bit more part of what we do, we say that it's globalized culture a little bit. So we consume global music, we consume global television show and global movies, and that the youth in Japan have more in common with the teenagers in Southern California than they do with their own parents in Japan. So that's been a big change in culture just because that institution of media has changed. Anyway, we're going to look at this right here. This is Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions, and he presented 4 originally: power distance, the amount of distance we were willing to accept and expect in relationships, big or small, masculinity versus femininity, assertive avoidance, individualism, and collectivism. And then this new one came along later, And that's also the last year or so has been divided into two. So we're going to go to Hofstede's webpage, which is pretty interesting. You can compare countries here. Hopefully it'll work out. Oh, somehow I bounced out inappropriately. All right, so hopefully we've got this working right. So we type in United States there, and that gives us a feel for what we have. Power distance is relatively low. I don't have a huge class structure in the U.S. Just because I'm the professor, you guys don't look at me and think I'm cooler than you are. Your boss is at the same level you are. When you go out to dinner, the person that waits on you is at the same level you are. There isn't a big amount of power distance. This idea that you do stuff just because your dad tells you to do it, it's not a big deal. We are very high on individualism. This is our highest. We believe that the rights of the individual are more important than the rights of the collective. Masculinity versus femininity, this was conflict resolution styles. So we believe in winners and losers in the U.S. We're fairly masculine. I win, you lose. If you get a bigger piece of the pie, that means there's less for me. So I have to, fight to get more pie. Those countries that are high in terms of femininity, they go with, let's reason together. Let's come up with a win-win solution. If there's not enough pie, we'll go out and make more pie. All right. Uncertainty avoidance is our ability to tolerate ambiguous situations. Do we need a lot of instruction, or do we just need the outlines of something and then we take off on it? We're kind of in the middle there. Some of you feel very comfortable taking a road trip without much planning ahead of time. Others of you have to map out the route and know what hotels you're going to stay, that sort of thing. Long-term orientation and indulgence were designed to capture the Chinese work ethic, because countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan were all doing extremely well, and they had such a huge Chinese group of population that they tried to create a something that would capture who they are, the ability to think long-term. United States, we do not think long-term. The fact that all you guys are in school and the payoff for that is 4 or 5 years down the road is almost a miracle based on our culture. Not only that, we don't think long-term, but we also want our reward right now. So we're unwilling to wait. We want to be indulged. So we're very high on indulgence. So we'll go ahead and put China in here to compare. And look at the power distance in China. It's very important, the family that you're born into. The rights of the collective are way more important than the rights of the individual. And we're not talking all of China. We're talking about the family. So your Chinese friend, he has to do what his parents and grandparents tell him to do, and his extended family. They expect him to be a certain way, and he has to do it. Masculinity, very similar, no big deal there. Uncertainty avoidance, Chinese a little bit lower. But there, no big surprise. Long-term orientation, that's the one they score highest on. And that's the one that the U.S. scores lowest on. The one that the United States scores highest on, China scores lowest on. So when we talk about trade issues, trade deals, it might not come as a surprise that we have some issues because culturally there's some dynamic differences between the United States and China. Here's indulgences. Chinese are willing to wait for the reward, whereas the U.S. we are not. I think what I want to do is, I think it's Finland. It might be Sweden, but let's go ahead. Yes, Finland right here, but I think a better example would be Sweden. Yeah, there's Sweden. Look at, they score extremely high in femininity versus masculinity. I just find that fairly interesting. And you can see the Scandinavian countries, Finland and Norway, both score higher than the United States, but that's huge, very low on masculinity. Let us come together, reason it out, come to a win-win solution, that sort of thing. All right, so I'm going to try to get us back into there we go, back into the slide presentation and finish this off. This book makes a difference between core beliefs and secondary beliefs. Core beliefs are the ones we kind of grew up with and we know to be true. Secondary beliefs are a little bit more malleable. So I have a core belief that family is the most important thing, But as I get older and I grow, maybe my definition of family changes. Here it's just my parents and my siblings. Here it could be, different types of families in terms of gay couples. It could be, it's not just blood that determines family. It's my friends that I choose, that sort of thing. These are some categories that your book puts in. I like Hofstede's better, so we're going to stick with them. But wanted you to see how they kind of overlap. How we see ourselves versus how we see our others. We could put individualism in there versus collectivism. How we view organizations, our view of society. Again, those are some things that we could fold into Hofstede's dimensions in terms of power distance. Do I believe that my manager, by virtue of him being the manager, has a role he should play over me? Do I believe my professor, by his version of, he's the professor, so he's on a much different level than I am? Most of us in the United States don't believe that. Most of you feel comfortable calling me by my first name, putting your arm around me and say, look, Mark, this is not working out. You've got to turn up the volume in terms of your presentations. They've got to be quite a bit better than they are. Something like that. I don't know. I don't know if you criticize me, but that's what I mean by power distance. Most of you don't feel that bad of going in and talking to your boss after working at the company for 3 or 4 months and just telling him what you feel that could help him do a little bit better as a boss. We have very, very narrow power distance in the United States. What we have here is the spiritual dimension, and a lot of times when we talk about spirituality, we put it apart, because if you consider yourself very spiritual, that kind of drives almost all of your culture, all of it. And so it's difficult to differentiate yourself. So we set it aside and look at those other things, and Hofstede does at least, and so I like that as an approach to it. Again, just to recap, in the marketing environment, there's a whole bunch of things that we do not have control over. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't monitor. We should be out checking on it to see what's happening, looking at the tea leaves, see what's happening with the changes in demographics, and be proactive. Don't wait to have the tragedy happen and then respond to it. That's going to make it difficult to work in the marketplace. So there we go. That's the end of chapter 4.